The glass shattered 3 inches from Amara's face. It exploded against the ivory wall behind her, raining crystal shards across the polished marble floor, and the whole room held its breath. The other household staff, 2 women pressed into the hallway corner, flinched so hard they bumped into each other. One of them covered her mouth. The other closed her eyes. They had seen this before. They knew what came next: the crying, the apologies that went ignored, the frantic call to the agency, the suitcase dragged back to the front gate. But Amara did not move. She stood in the center of the receiving room of the Han household, one of the most expensive addresses in Gangnam, Seoul, and she looked at the girl who had thrown the glass with the same steady, unblinking calm she had walked in with 20 minutes earlier. Her hands were loose at her sides. Her breathing did not change. And when the silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable, Amara tilted her head very slightly to the left and said, in a voice so quiet it barely reached the walls, "Should I get a broom, Miss Han? Or would you prefer I leave the mess?" Han Seo-yeon, 17 years old, daughter of Han Jae-won, one of the 12 wealthiest men in South Korea, stared at her. Nobody talked to her like that. Nobody stayed. She turned and walked out of the room without a word. Behind Amara, one of the staff women whispered to the other in Korean, fast and sharp, "She'll be gone by lunch." The other one nodded. They had both believed the same thing about the last 3 maids. One had lasted 4 hours. One had lasted 2. The one before her had turned around in the driveway and never even come inside. Amara picked up the broom herself and began to sweep. The Han household ran like a machine, a cold, silent, expensive machine. There were rules laminated and framed in the staff corridor, 12 of them, including one that specified the exact temperature at which Mr. Han's morning tea should be served and one that prohibited any staff member from making eye contact with Seo-yeon unless she initiated it first. The furniture was white or gray. The walls were white. The art on the walls was abstract, enormous canvases that cost more than most people's homes and communicated nothing. Every surface was clean because the surfaces were always cleaned. There was no warmth in the building. Not from the decor. Not from the lighting, which was recessed and cool-toned. Not from the other staff, who moved efficiently and communicated in murmurs and avoided one another's eyes. The housekeeper, Mrs. O, walked Amara through the house on her first hour with the specific manner of someone who had given this tour too many times and had long since stopped expecting it to matter. She was a small woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair and a face that had made peace with unhappiness. She explained that Seo-yeon's breakfast tray was to be outside her door at 7:15. That her room was not to be entered unless she permitted it. That if she threw something, Amara was to clean it up and say nothing. And if she says something cruel? Amara asked. Mrs. O blinked, like the question had been asked in a language she had mostly forgotten. "You say nothing," she said. "You keep your eyes down. You do your work. Has anyone tried something different?" There was a pause. "They don't last long enough to try anything," Mrs. O said, and walked on. The other staff, 2 women, a driver, a groundskeeper, watched Amara with the cautious curiosity of people who had learned not to get attached. Over the first day, she caught fragments of conversation she was not meant to hear. "She'll figure it out by dinner. Bet she's gone before the father gets home. The agency must be running out of people." At lunch, taken quickly and quietly in the staff room, one of the younger women, Ji-yeon, looked at Amara across the table with something that was not quite pity and not quite warning. "She's not going to make it easy," Ji-yeon said. "She never does." "I'm not looking for easy," Amara said. Ji-yeon said nothing to that. She looked down at her food. Seo-yeon made her first move at 11 in the morning. She walked into the sitting room where Amara was arranging fresh flowers, a task she had taken upon herself because the previous arrangement had been dead for 3 days and nobody had removed it, and she looked at Amara the way people look at something they intend to test. "Those are the wrong flowers," Seo-yeon said. "My mother always ordered white peonies. Those are ranunculus. Are you stupid, or did they just not brief you?" Amara looked at the flowers, then back at Seo-yeon. Were they out of season when your mother was alive, too? Or did she have a different supplier? The air shifted. Seo-yeon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Don't mention my mother. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You didn't upset me. Her voice went flat and sharp, like a blade laid down. You bored me. That's different. She turned and walked away, but her steps were faster than they had been, and her shoulders were higher, and Amara noticed both things and filed them quietly away. The second test came after lunch. Amara found her personal phone moved from the staff room to the top of the outdoor fountain, balanced on the edge. It was not raining, so it wasn't damaged. It was just a message. She retrieved it without comment and said nothing. The third test came at 3 in the afternoon, when Seo-yeon walked past Amara in the hallway and, without breaking stride, said in English, "You're not going to last. They never do. There's something wrong with this house and eventually you'll feel it too, and then you'll leave. They all leave." She said it the way someone says the weather. Matter of fact. Pre-resigned. Like she had stopped hoping otherwise. Amara turned and watched her walk away, and for the first time all day, something shifted in her chest. Over the next 2 days, Amara began to notice things that weren't in the laminated rules. The cameras. There were 14 that she could find, 1 in the main corridor, 2 in the kitchen, 1 at the top of the staircase, but there were also smaller ones, almost invisible, positioned in places that weren't about security. 1 in the corner of the sitting room where Seo-yeon sometimes sat alone in the evenings. 1 angled down the hallway toward her bedroom door. Amara mentioned it to Mrs. O. Mrs. O said they were Mr. Han's, for security, and her expression said the conversation was over. The flinch. It happened twice. The first time was when Mr. Han's business manager, a man named Director Kwon, came to the house to drop off documents. He was in his 40s, immaculately dressed, with a voice that landed on every surface in the room like something heavy being set down. When he came through the door, Seo-yeon was at the bottom of the staircase. She saw him and went still. Not the stillness of disinterest. The stillness of a person calculating something fast. She took 3 steps back up the stairs, not retreating, exactly, but repositioning, and she didn't come back down until his car was gone. The second time was more telling. Mrs. O mentioned that Director Kwon had called ahead to say he was coming by the following Tuesday, and Seo-yeon, who was in the next room, went quiet for the rest of the evening. The behavior. Cruel to staff. Brittle with everyone. Cold by default. But Amara watched her the way you watch something that doesn't add up, and what she saw underneath the cruelty was not contempt. It was alertness. Constant, exhausting, animal alertness. The kind that belongs to someone who has learned that the room can change without warning. Seo-yeon wasn't cold because she felt nothing. She was cold because she had built cold as a wall, and she lived on the inside of it where nobody could reach her. The fourth night, Amara was mopping the lower hallway at 10:15 when she heard it. It was quiet at first, a sound she could have explained away. Then it wasn't. She set the mop against the wall and moved toward the sound, which was coming from behind the door of the small reading room at the end of the east corridor, a room that was never used. She pushed the door open without knocking. Seo-yeon was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up and her face buried in her arms, and she was crying with the terrible controlled quiet of someone who had learned to cry without being heard. When the door opened, she snapped her head up and her eyes went immediately furious. "Get out," she said. Amara came in and closed the door behind her and sat down on the floor 5 feet away. "Not too close. I said get out. I heard you." Seo-yeon stared at her. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. She hated being seen this way, that much was obvious as anything Amara had ever read on a human face. "You can't just tell me to leave again if you want," Amara said. "I'll go if you really mean it." But I don't think you mean it. The silence went long and taut. Then Seo-yeon made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. What are you doing, she said. Not a question. Almost a plea. Sitting with you. Why? Because you've been alone in this house for a long time, and I don't think anyone has ever just sat with you. Seo-yeon looked away. Her throat worked. You don't know anything about me. I know you threw a glass at me the first day and it hasn't stopped bothering you that I didn't leave. Something cracked in Seo-yeon's expression. Just at the edges. Just enough. You don't hate people, Amara said, and her voice was very quiet. You're afraid of them. The silence that followed was the most honest silence Amara had encountered since she walked through the Han gate. Seo-yeon did not confirm it and did not deny it. She just sat very still, like someone who had been holding their breath for years and had just been told they were allowed to stop. After a long moment, Seo-yeon said, My father's going to be home Friday. I know, Amara said. He doesn't know what Director Kwon is like when he's not here. She said it so quietly it nearly disappeared. Or maybe he does and he doesn't care. I don't know which one is worse. Amara went still. What does Director Kwon do? Seo-yeon pressed her lips together. Looked at the floor. He gives instructions, she said carefully. About how I should behave. What I should say in front of investors. What image I'm supposed to project. He controls my schedule when my father travels. She paused. He told the last maid I was dangerous. He told the one before that I had a psychiatric history and shouldn't be engaged with. He decides who gets hired and who gets let go. The pieces assembled in Amara's mind with a cold clarity. The cameras. The position staff. The maids who never lasted. The bad behavior being witnessed and reported and used. Seo-yeon wasn't just difficult. Seo-yeon was being managed. Isolated. Made into a story that kept everyone at a safe distance from her, and kept her at a safe distance from anyone who might listen. He's been provoking you, Amara said. Seo-yeon's eyes met hers. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Amara stood up slowly. Where are the cameras in this room? There isn't one. It's the only room. A beat. I found that out the hard way. Then we have until Friday, Amara said. She spent the next 36 hours careful and precise, because she understood now that the danger was not Seo-yeon. She found the staff agency file that Director Kwon had submitted recommendations through, glowing references for his choices, damning reports for anyone he wanted gone. She found the scheduling override logs on the household management system, access she was technically not supposed to have but which Mrs. O, quietly and without saying why, showed her how to reach. She found 3 months of incident reports, all filed by Kwon, all building a portrait of a girl who was disturbed and volatile and unmanageable. She found, buried in the system, a request submitted 4 days ago for a psychiatric evaluation, signed by Kwon, addressed to Han Jae-won, scheduled for the week after his return. Han Jae-won came home on Friday evening. He was a tall man, 50-something, with the tired eyes of someone who had built something enormous and wasn't sure anymore why he'd wanted it. He walked through his own house like a man checking into a hotel, polite, distant, temporary. He greeted Mrs. O. He did not look for his daughter. Amara was waiting in the main corridor when Director Kwon arrived 30 minutes later, invited for dinner, warm and confident and already filling the room with his voice before his coat was off. He saw Amara and his eyes sharpened for just a moment. You're still here, he said. I am, she said. Remarkable, he said, and smiled, and walked past her toward Han Jae-won's study. She followed him. She knocked, opened the door, and said, Mr. Han. I need 5 minutes. Both of you should hear this. Director Kwon turned around with an expression that would have frightened a smaller person. This is completely inappropriate. Please, Amara said to Han Jae-won, and there was something in her voice, not urgency, not desperation, just clarity, that made him stop and look at her properly for the first time. She showed him everything. She talked for 4 minutes and 30 seconds. She did not raise her voice once. Kwon spoke over her twice. Denied it once. Pivoted to her conduct and credentials once. Han Jae-won held up one hand, a small gesture, and Kwon stopped. In the silence, the door behind them opened. Seo-yeon stood in the doorway. She looked at her father, really looked at him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then her face, all 17 years of armor she had built, came apart at once. Not violently. Quietly. Like something released. "Appa," she said, and it was barely a sound. Han Jae-won crossed the room to his daughter, and Amara stepped back, and Director Kwon said something else that no one heard, because it no longer mattered what he said. Later, much later, after Kwon had left and arrangements had been made and the house had shifted into something quieter and different than it had been before, Amara was standing in the hallway outside Seo-yeon's room, preparing to leave for the night. The door opened. Seo-yeon stood in the frame, her eyes still raw, and she reached out and took Amara's hand. Not tightly. Just held it. "Don't leave," she said quietly. "Please." Amara looked at her for a long moment. At the girl who had thrown glass and swallowed cruelty and built walls out of whatever she had left. At the girl who had cried in a room with no cameras because it was the only room she had. "I'm not going anywhere," Amara said. Seo-yeon's grip didn't tighten. She just nodded, very slowly, and then she said the last thing she said that night, the truest thing she had said since Amara walked through the gate, "You're the first person who saw me." She paused. "Not my behavior. Me." And for the first time in this house, the silence that followed felt like something was beginning rather than something ending.